Coming up on today's show, one of Canada's greatest wheelchair basketball players of all time, Patrick Anderson, stops by. We chat with him all things basketball and legacy. You won't want to miss it. Plus, we also dive into a few burning questions we had around the sport. This is PSN. Let's go.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
I am Alex Smyth, and I want to welcome in Nathan Clement, my co-host. Nathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Alex. I'm really excited about today's interview and getting to share that with everyone. How are you?
I'm doing well. As also, I'm excited. I'm pumped. You know, this is someone I've wanted to chat with for a long time, so I'm excited that we actually have the opportunity to do it. So let's get into it. You know, Patrick Anderson is here. He is one of the greatest wheelchair basketball players of all time. He's been playing the sport for over 20 years. He recently was a part of the 2024 Canadian Paralympic team. They finished fourth at the Paralympics. Let's welcome him in. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
My pleasure. Good to be here. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. I mean, any day we get a chance to chat with someone who has that kind of esteem within a parasport like yourself, it's always a good day. I'm curious, like, first off, how are you doing? You know, it's been a few months out since the Paralympics. Like, what have you been up to, and how are you doing now that the games are behind you?
Well, this is a mind map of my brain right here, if you could see on the chalkboard there. But no, it's been nice. Paris was a culmination of a long sort of adventure for our family. I went over and played professionally in Spain last season to try to prepare for qualification and then for the games. And in the summer, we were all over the place, and then they were over in Paris. And it was just amazing. And even though it didn't end with a medal, it was just almost perfect sort of adventure from start to finish, and with some real peaks, some real highs, some lows in there too. But anyway, but now we're back in life in New York in our old apartment and trying to figure it out, kids in a new school. So I've kind of been busy enough to not crash, like it's common, and I have in the past, so yeah, just kind of staying busy and, trying to figure out what's going to come next. So having conversations around what the next chapter is going to look like.
You mentioned qualification, and for yourselves and the team going into the qualification or repechage tournament, you started off in the group stage, had a tough group stage, but then you went up against Italy in the knockout round. What was that like, defeating Italy and then catching fire going into the games like that?
Well, I'd be lying if I said we were, brimming with confidence going into that tournament. That being said, like, by the time that game rolled around, even though we were 0-3, we were sort of like hit, finding our stride, and those were all pretty close games. The third one was like we lost on a buzzer beater to Iran, and so they're all good teams. They're all competitive games. It's not like we were getting blown out. Like, what are we doing here? So we were close. We knew that, and at that point, we're like, anything can happen, because the day before we probably should have played Germany, which is kind of interesting, because we ended up playing them twice in Paris, and in the bronze, losing to them in the bronze medal. So it's an interesting kind of like fork in the road. What if, to think what would happen if we played them? Because the day before we played Italy played Germany, and they're down by 22, I think. And my teammate from my Spanish club, Giulio Papi from Italy, he just went bananas, actually, from start to finish that game. It's honestly one of the greatest shooting performances I've ever seen. It was amazing. And they came back and pulled up that game against Germany, and they were on cloud nine, obviously, just because it was a huge win and totally super emotional. But actually, I think in the big picture, that sort of proved a disservice to them, because they kind of had to come out the next day and try to when it really mattered. And maybe caught them a little flat. I mean, nobody's flat in that scenario, but we peaked in that game, and they maybe peaked a day early. So I was sad. I didn't want to play against him because I wanted him to be in Paris. We got pretty tight last year playing together club, but I mean, that sport, some heartbreak is baked in for somebody,
And when you look and examine kind of the international level of competition, are the same major players kind of the ones who really are dominating the sport on the international level, or are there new countries, new teams that have really kind of established themselves as this top tier competitive team that you always kind of have to be focused and prepared for when you go up against them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are more good teams than there were 20 years ago. Like the floor has really risen a lot. On the other end, like the best teams. I mean, the U.S. is there, and they're always there, and they always have been there among the best handful of teams. Right now, they've separated themselves from everybody, like separated themselves from the rest of us like this, and maybe that much ahead of Great Britain. Great Britain's they're sort of 1A and 1B. Although, I mean, the U.S. is the best team. They've proven it now. They won Worlds. They beat GB in the final. They beat them in the final in Paris. So, but really tight games, and most people would probably flip a coin on any given day between those two teams. But Great Britain was always a team that was good, like winning bronze medals and being competitive. But they're sort of benefiting from the legacy of the 2012 games. I just a lot of the young guys that are 15 years younger than me or whatever talk about seeing us play in London and being inspired. And not only the guys making up that team now, but the next wave of players, like their junior team, is really strong. So they have this real wave of talent coming through, which in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways is directly tied to being a host of the Paralympics. And I guess in some small way too, like we having won, some of the guys have been, like kind enough at this point in my career, people say nice things to me because I'm not threatening to them, I guess, probably. But they're like, hey man, it was really inspiring to watch you guys win. And that way you guys played in 2012. So I guess I deserve just a tiny bit of credit for their success.
There you go.
Not gonna,
you're winning indirectly now. Yeah. Even if you're not coming away with a medal from the games, it's like, oh well, I inspired all these other players on these medal winning teams. So
there is something to that. Yeah, I gotta, I appreciate that. I mean, it's not consolation for my teammates, but my phase of my career, and I've hung around this long. I guess that's one of the fruits of it. Right after the bronze medal game, one of those guys showed up or just came up and hit, tapped my foot plate, like got face to face. He's like, you were at a camp in 2011 or something that I came to in Cologne, Germany. You ran it and inspired me, and now I'm beating you for a bronze medal. I'm like, great. I guess that's the sweet part of bittersweet. That's cool.
You've mentioned, like, in the last 20 years, the ceiling has changed completely, and you have that grassroots coming in there. And throughout your career, you've competed in different leagues in Australia, in Europe, in the United States as well. How important is that kind of grassroots leagues really going? As like a para-athlete, as a paracyclist, we see how well wheelchair basketball is just dominating the landscape with that grassroots. But for yourself, how much are you seeing that really helping that next cream of the crop, that next generation really grow and get into the sport?
Yeah, I mean, everyone will tell you that they wish there were more clubs and more players. And, there are a handful of countries that seem to just have sort of a wave of talent coming up, like GB. The U.S. always seems to, just because of the size of the country, how popular basketball is, and the number of junior teams and the college programs that they have down there. So there's a bit of a feeder system. Spain has done very well for a number of years, I think partly based on they have probably the strongest club team or club league in the world, and so they draw a lot of the best players from Great Britain and all across Europe. And it seems like the participation is broader and deeper than ever. And when you see, Iran finished third at Worlds. They got a bronze at Worlds 2 years ago and didn't qualify this time around, but they have a lot of talent. They were often only showing up with half their team, and some of those guys are playing in the Turkish league, which is very strong. And so it really is pretty global. And the strength of the Italian Pro League, the Spanish Pro League, kind of gives a place for the best talent, at least for part of their career, to kind of cluster and to kind of push each other and grow, and that sort of pushes that ceiling, I think, up in a way that didn't really exist so much when I was 20 years ago when I was playing pro in Europe. It just wasn't quite the same concentration of talent and opportunity to kind of really play a number of really strong teams with talent drawn from all over the world, this sort of top flight talent. Japan, like people are always a lot of talent from all over the world ending up in these leagues. But grassroots is near to dear to my heart. I guess I'm talking about sort of elite club level basketball that feeds up in the Paralympics, but I think they're the heroes of the sport. And back in Canada, I see this generation, my generation, sort of taking the reins. I mean, some of them already have, but my teammate Tyler Miller taking over the Twin City Spinners, which was my first club. I started when I was 11 years old, and Bruce Russell ran it for decades, handing it off to Tyler, and Tyler taking it and doing all the things, being the administration guy and coaching and schlepping chairs to the storage unit and back to the gym and all that kind of stuff. And that to me is just the best. That's where it all starts. And those guys are the real, to me, like heroes and champions of adaptive sport, those builders.
And so when you talk about the elite club level, because as you mentioned last year, you were playing in Spain, you played with the New York club, you played in Canada. Like, which country or which kind of league did you enjoy playing in the most, and why was it that there was that environment that you really enjoyed playing in?
It's a good question. I think because they'll be good in their own ways. Spain is so fresh. It was such a break for my wife. To just, the lifestyle over there for those 6 months. You know, our youngest had some health issues out of the gate the first few years of her life, and still does. But it was sort of a break from all that, and so it's kind of inseparable from my kind of seeing experience through their eyes. That was the first time that they really got to tag along and do it alongside with me. You know, like a lot of my memories are before family and stuff, and they seem pretty foggy and distant at this point. But so that one's so fresh that it's special. But I guess I go back to Londil. You know, I played 3 years with Londil in Germany back in the early 2000s, and they're still, you know, they put us out of Champions League last year. They're still one of the top handful of clubs in Europe, and now have been for 20-something years. And they really are an amazing sort of case study in how you can build grassroots and interest in wheelchair basketball in kind of the middle of nowhere. They're not in a major city in Germany, but they're in a place where they had just a couple of people who really were passionate, drew in the right volunteers. You know, those guys kind of took over, created kind of more of a business model where they brought in, you know, if you have 50 sponsors, or 50 fans, you can sell that to 2 sponsors and say, these 50 fans are going to be in the gym 9 times. Do you want to market to them, or, you know, advertise to them? Sure. And then the next year it's 100 fans and 4 sponsors. And it really was like this gradual thing. And now they're playing in front of, you know, 1,500, 2,000 fans and a whole, you know, just the whole thing. So I got in when that was sort of blowing up. And so playing in front of a raucous 1,500, you know, sold out, you know, 1,500 fans in a sold out gym with the drums banging and everything like that, that still, like 20 years later, that was still like unique and special. And it's just that much cooler knowing that they're still at it, and that it's not just a flash in the pan, but they really are kind of a model for building a wheelchair basketball club in a professional way.
You've mentioned so many great names in wheelchair basketball, and even like Canadian history, but also throughout the world. Is there anyone who's on your Mount Rushmore of wheelchair basketball players?
Just off the top of my head, I'll go, this is super homerism, all guys I've played with, well, except one. I mean, Joey Johnson was, you know, my running mate, Team Canada and Londil for many years, and he's just the all-around. He's like Jokic. He's just, except he's the exact same, where he just wants to win and he'll do whatever. Like, fine, you want 30 points, I'll give you that. You need just like 20 points and 20 rebounds, fine, I'll give you that. Like, had the whole skill set, was big, intimidating, smarter than you, the whole package. It's a great comp. So he's definitely up there. Jamie Borisov was our class 1 for many years, and he's just smart, just never the fastest, but just kind of got there before you and could just guard up against bigger guys, against higher classification guys all the time, and win these just little battles. And the ball never stopped with him. Even though he was smaller, whatever, he found a way to kind of keep it moving and make the next play. He's just a real connector, and just a smart guy, the professor, as we call him sometimes. I got to put Steve Serio on there, captain of the U.S. team for the last 3 years, and we played together with the Knicks. And I just think pound for pound, he might be the best ever. And we played a lot of one-on-one the last few years. And he's a bit smaller than me. He's a class 3-5. I'm a class 4-5, so he's a bit of a competitive disadvantage. But like, there's none of that. There's no excuses with him. He is very disciplined in the way he approaches the game, and he's also a guy. He just wants to win, and he can impact winning in so many different ways, offensively, defensively, with his communication. He's like, get out of the way, coach. I got things to say. I've been in timeouts, and coaches do, because he does, and he really reads the game well and quickly, and communicates really quickly and concisely. It's really impressive. The guy, and I don't know, average people don't necessarily see that when they see all the things that, when they consider what a basketball player can do. They don't really know like what that person's like in the huddle necessarily, but that's such a huge part, making 5 guys work together as a team. I've never seen anyone as good as him at it. The last would be my nemesis, Troy Sachs, I think, who's Australian star back when I was coming up, and everyone was like, that's the guy you're trying to take down. But he was just, he had a lot of sort of personality, and everyone was always like, he's a jerk, he's this, he's that. And I was too young and impressionable to really have this sort of space to form my own opinion. But, so we were never, we were friendly and sort of, acquaintances to some degree. But I don't know him personally all that well. But I've always said I think he's the most talented wheelchair basketball player I've ever seen. And I think if anyone would have made it like an able-bodied sports, I don't know what he'd be playing in Australia, cricket or some form of rugby or something, but he was just a phenomenal athlete and talent and just his competitive fire. I think sometimes people thought he was a jerk just because he was so kind of competitive and in a way, like a Draymond Green kind of way, like provocative. And yeah, those guys go over the line sometimes for sure. And it's probably maybe disrespectful to certain individuals of the game sometimes, but it's also just a different breed. And I think I kind of was too much like, I don't want to, that's ugly. And I sort of missed some of the beauty of his competitive spirit until like later on, we had a little more distance, and I was like, okay. Anyway, that was a long answer to Rushmore, but
no, it was great though, because you kind of broke it down, and even just having those comparables to kind of NBA kind of style players. You have had your fair share of comparisons as well. Like people have called you the Michael Jordan of wheelchair basketball. When you hear that, how do you feel? Because that is a big kind of comparison to put on somebody.
Yeah, I can't help but be flattered by it. I feel like for the most part, I've benefited from those kind of expectations. I think because they came pretty early in my career, just because we had team success early, and that wasn't always good. Those expectations and that pressure, but it motivated me in the practice gym, and also like when I was on court, I kind of had that mentality that like, people expect me to do like Pat Anderson things, like they're like, who is this guy? Or I've heard about this guy, let me see what he can do. And I've heard MJ talk about that, like some kid in the crowd, it might be the only time they ever see me play, and I gotta play for them. And in my own humble 1,500 rather than 15,000 seat arena way, I tried to honor that and live up to it. But I'm not competitively homicidal, so I feel like the comparison breaks down at some point. But it's flattering.
And Pat, we got to wrap things up shortly, but I just have one final question for you. Obviously, being a part of the sport for 20 plus years, you lived it, breathed it, you've seen the highest of highs within the sport. If you could change one rule around wheelchair basketball, what would that rule be?
Oh man, can I pick 2?
Sure, do it.
Let me pick 2 quick. First one's easy. I would allow able-bodied players to play and just find a way to slot them into the classification system. Let's do it. 2 would be, we have a real weird, I should have gone the other way because it's more exciting, but a really weird chair measurement rule where class 3s and lower can sit 5 centimeters higher than everybody else. And it's really, really kind of skews the competitive landscape, and the historical reasons for it I won't get into, but they're just kind of like it was a historical kind of accident that happened, and this legacy is that like 20 years later we have this weird situation where these guys who are really good are also sitting 5 centimeters taller than everyone. It's just like this. It's not a smart look, in my opinion. We can do better than that, but that's in the weeds somewhere. But on the bigger level, I've played, in Canada, we've, for my whole career, really embraced able-bodied participation. I think it's so cool on a number of levels. I understand some of the pushback against it, but I think at all levels, it's only additive if it's done right.
Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time. I've learned a ton. I really appreciate catching up with you. We'll definitely have to stay connected and catch up down the road.
Sounds good. Reach out anytime. Good chatting with you guys.
Well, that was a great interview, Nathan. I just loved how you can really get a sense of who Patrick is, not only as a player, but also as a person, just like, having those really well thought out, well constructed answers. Like I loved especially when he started to break down the Mount Rushmore and just going into each person that he's putting up there, the style of player they are, why they brought something so unique to the game. It was really fascinating for me. What did you think?
I felt the same, just like how well thought out he is with his answers and the deep histories and the deep kind of expressions and just the relationships he had with these guys that he's gone up against. Some of them from Australia, some of them from the United States, and have had heated battles and tough battles, or even Italian friends that he's played on different leagues with, in different leagues with. So it's really amazing just getting to see a little glimpse inside his brain and just seeing the history. But also what really impressed me is he is one of the greatest. He should be on that Mount Rushmore himself, but he's so humble. He is so giving with his time and just doing camps and doing other activities. And you and I talk a lot about grassroots and how important grassroots, and to have someone like that and a leader like that, it's so critical when you're growing a game, when you're really trying to share the stories of the game and have that legacy going on in the future.
Yeah, and I think what's also fascinating is the kind of the landscape within wheelchair basketball, especially at the club level, because that is quite unique that there is such an established club system around the world. As he mentioned, he was playing in Spain before the Paralympics. He's based in New York. He plays as part of that team. He's played in Canada. He's played in Germany. Like, it is so rare that you actually have a parasport that has that much of a reach and that consistency in these different leagues around the world. Like, that's got to be huge, not only for the development of the sport, but also for the fact that you're getting players that are being able to go toe to toe or head to head against other like top level of competition on a regular basis, and then also have that financial support of being able to be a professional player in a league like that is huge too.
Yeah, that's something that is beyond impressive. And it's something that, especially what they've done in Europe, is remarkable with the Champions League, Champions Cups, but also the Turkish leagues and everything that they're developing over there. And Patrick was talking about how in Germany and other places you had crowds of 1,500, 2,000 plus people in these, I could assume, tiny gyms, and those places would just, those noise would just reverberate, and it would be so loud, and those atmospheres would just be all encompassing. And like, I even know down in the United States, as I've gotten to know a bunch of athletes with the current roster of the men's wheelchair basketball team and the women's wheelchair basketball team, and just like seeing a lot of the NCAA level with like Arizona, Arkansas, Alabama, they all have teams now, and it is really impressive just seeing that university and that league level. And man, and like we talked about it off camera too, is just how passionate the fans are too. And that is really incredible. Is there's YouTube archives that go back to the 80s, that go back to the 90s, just showing basketball tournaments, and not even like Paralympics alone, but different regionals and invitational cups. And that is the benchmark of what it should be like for all parasports. But it's really beautiful to see just the passion and just the love that people have in that community for the sport.
Do you ever get jealous when you hear Patrick talking about 1,500 fans in a arena watching them, watching him play? Do you ever get jealous that you don't have that on a consistent level when you're competing?
I wouldn't say so. I would say it's one of those things where it's an appreciation. It's really cool. It's really amazing to see that groundwork that has been done in that sport. And it's more of not jealousy, but it's more of a competitive determination to hopefully help bring my sport, but also bring other sports to that kind of place where you can have leagues, where you can have races that aren't just part of the international calendar, where you have that grassroots, where you have those kind of development opportunities, because that's where it starts and it expands out from there, when you can have kind of sellout crowds or have loud venues really supporting, really cheering you on. So I feel like for me, it's not jealousy. It's more of a, okay, this is awesome. How do we capture that in other sports? How do we capture that in my sport?
Yeah, it's so impressive that they've been able to kind of build that momentum, that following around the world, and the fans stay and they're passionate and they're connected. So hopefully, as it's a blueprint for other parasports going forward. But Nathan, it's time to move on from the Patrick Anderson interview, because you have the next edition of the PSN update.
Now, the PSN update.
Canada's sporting weekend took us across the Atlantic as the Canadian seven-a-side para-soccer team faces a do-or-die match against England in the seven-a-side Soccer World Cup. Led by captain Samuel Sharon, the Reds defeated Japan 2-0 in a rainy match early in the week. This showdown against England's Lions is a winner-take-all game, with the victor advancing to the knockout round. Check back with PSN to see how Canada fared. Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, Ottawa hosts the 2024 Canadian Boccia Championships. Featuring Paralympic stars and the future faces of the sports, it's expected to be a thrilling 30th anniversary for the national championship. And that's the Parasport preview.
Now, Nathan, I'm kind of curious. If there is one parasport that you have not been around, you haven't experienced, which one would you want to go and check out? Because for me, the more that we kind of follow the CP World Cup, I am more and more intrigued by it. I would love to go and check out a game. You know, they're playing in Spain right now. I'd love to go and see what that vibe, that atmosphere is like. What about you?
Well, first I got to talk about the CP soccer program and the seven-a-side soccer program. That was my start into the parasport world, and the team and the people there have a very special place in my heart, especially the head coach, Drew Ferguson, and the assistant coach, Doug Lusk, what they've done for that program and the work and time that they've put in. And I've seen a lot of those people. I've seen Samuel Sharon come back from injuries, and now he's leading the team into potentially what could be the biggest match in Canadian parasoccer history. And it's just really remarkable, the heart, the passion, the love that has gone into that program. And same thing as wheelchair basketball. They have leagues in England. They have leagues all around the world, and it's one of those sports that's really growing and really developing. But if I was to pick one for myself, I would probably have to go on the winter side. I've really been encapsulated by the Nordic scene, and just the amount of work, the amount of passion, the amount of time that goes into that sport. As a cyclist, I know how much an endurance sport can be great, but it also can suck, and it can be demanding, and it can be challenging, and just the amount of time that the Mark Arends of the world, the Natalie Wilkes, and the Brittany Hudaks, and the Colin Camerons, the amount that they invest. And even back here in Vancouver, we have Leo Samarelli, who just made his first national team with Nordic Canada, and it's really amazing to see how that sport's growing, and just the culture and just that invigoration that sport has.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, the Nordic side of things is so fascinating. I on a slight kind of detour from the Nordic side, also the biathlon, the para-biathlon is also just as fascinating. I had a chance to check that out when I was doing a story on Mark Arends, and absolutely phenomenal. And ironically, Nathan, you're a great tease man, because coming up on the next episode of the show, Kevin Pedersen from Nordic Canada will be on the show, so we'll dive into that sport for sure. But that's it for Parasport Nation. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.